My name is Pastor Samuel Adebayo. I am 42 years old, and on a night I will never forget, March 15, 2019, I died for 7 minutes. Before that night, I believed I understood faith. I believed I understood calling. But nothing in my life prepared me for the fire that would consume my flesh, break my body, and then, by the mercy of Jesus Christ Himself, bring me back whole. My journey began far from the northern fields where flames later wrapped around me. I grew up in Lagos, in a home where scripture was recited more often than the daily news. My father, a deacon, walked with quiet authority. My mother led the women's ministry and carried worship in her voice wherever she went. Ours was a home saturated in hymns, prayer meetings, and the sweet aroma of fellowship. But though I knew the language of faith, I did not yet know the weight of surrender. At 16, a night came that carved itself into my soul. The world outside my window hummed with the usual Lagos noise, yet inside my room, a supernatural stillness settled over me. I knelt on my small rug, tears soaking the pages of an open Bible. I wasn't praying with eloquence. I wasn't reciting memorized verses. I was simply asking God why my life felt average, empty of purpose, despite growing up in His house. Then, without warning, I felt a presence so profound that my breathing faltered. God spoke, not with thunder, but with a voice that echoed through the chambers of my heart. Preach my gospel. Shepherd my people. Lay down your life for my kingdom. I trembled, overwhelmed by a calling I didn't fully understand. I imagined sacrifice in symbolic terms, giving up dreams, ambitions, and personal desires. I had no idea that years later, the fire of that calling would become painfully literal. I enrolled at Lagos Baptist Seminary after secondary school and dedicated myself to ministry. For several years, I pastored small congregations in southern Nigeria. They were peaceful communities, humble in size but rich in devotion. I baptized children, performed weddings, mediated conflicts, and preached to people who rarely questioned the gospel. Life was predictable, safe even. I was content, believing I was fulfilling God's purpose. But in early 2015, God disrupted that comfort. During morning prayer, I heard that same unmistakable voice, "Go north, Kaduna." My wife Sarah cried when I told her. She had been having dreams of fire, of darkness, of danger closing in. Neither of us understood those visions fully then. But the call was clear. And obedience, I would soon learn, is often the doorway to the furnace. We packed our belongings with trembling hands. Leaving Lagos wasn't easy, we were abandoning our comfort, our stability, and our life as we knew it. But obedience demanded it. When we arrived in Kaduna State, the atmosphere felt different, thicker somehow, as though tension lived in the very air. Kaduna is a land of both breathtaking beauty and deep conflict. Christians and Muslims coexist, but not always peacefully. News of burned churches, abducted pastors, and targeted congregations surfaced almost weekly. I had known persecution in theory. In the north, persecution had a face, a name, a location. We settled in a small town outside Kaduna City. Within 6 months, we planted New Life Gospel Church in a rented building that could hold around 200 people. Despite the climate, people came, hesitantly at first, then in growing numbers. Many were former Muslims who had encountered Jesus in dreams or through quiet conversations with believers. By 2018, our congregation had grown to about 150 committed members. The Spirit of God was moving mightily, but so was opposition. The first threat arrived as a handwritten note placed at the church entrance. The message was crude, written in broken English mixed with Hausa, but the intent was unmistakable: stop preaching. Stop converting our youth. Soon after, the local imam began condemning us by name during Friday sermons. He accused us of bringing foreign lies and misleading young people with Western religion. We prayed for him, but the hostility intensified. 3 Christian families in our community were forced to relocate after their businesses were burned. Children from our church were bullied at school. My wife often woke up trembling, her dreams filled with flames and shadows. Even the police, though not hostile, urged me to tone down my preaching. "Pastor," one officer said quietly, "your message is too bold for this place." But how does one dim the gospel? How do you whisper the name of Jesus when he commanded us to proclaim him boldly? Every day felt like walking a tightrope between obedience and danger. Fear and faith lived side by side in my heart. Yet every time I considered stepping back, the voice of God whispered, "Do not fear those who kill the body." I knew a storm was coming. But I did not know how devastating, or miraculous, it would be. March 15, 2019 began like any other Friday. I woke at 5 a.m., spent time in prayer, and read from John's Gospel. What I didn't know then was that my life was already counting down to its darkest hour. We held our usual evening Bible study, finishing around 8:30 p.m. The passage that night was John 15 verse 20, "If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also." I spoke those words with conviction, unaware they would soon echo through my dying breaths. When the last member, elderly Mrs. Adune, left the building, I locked the doors and began the familiar 10-minute walk home. The night was unusually calm. Stars shone brightly, and a faint breeze brushed against my face as I hummed Amazing Grace. I passed shuttered shops and greeted neighbors who sat outside enjoying the cool evening. Everything felt peaceful, deceptively so. I didn't know danger was gathering behind me like a shadow waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Halfway home, I heard footsteps. At first, I assumed someone from church had followed me to ask a question. But when I glanced over my shoulder, my blood chilled. 8 men. Faces covered. Moving with intent. I quickened my pace, they quickened theirs. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. By the time I reached the towering baobab tree that marked the midpoint of my route, they had surrounded me in a tight circle. Escape was impossible. Their leader stepped forward. His voice was low, his tone laced with venom. "So you are the one misleading our youth with your Jesus." They accused me of corrupting young people, of turning Muslims away from their families, of promoting a foreign religion. I tried to speak with the gentleness Christ commands, telling them Jesus loved them, that he came to save all, including those standing before me. My words struck them like gasoline on dry wood. Their leader spat at my feet. "Renounce this Jesus now," he commanded. "Deny him, and you go home tonight. Refuse, and you die." The world seemed to slow. My mind raced to Sarah, my children, my congregation. Fear clawed at my chest. But my spirit rose with unexpected strength. "I cannot deny the one who saved me," I said. "Jesus Christ is Lord, now and forever." Those words sealed my fate. The leader snarled an order. Rough hands seized me. They dragged me toward an open field, each step tearing me farther away from safety, closer to death. I smelled gasoline long before I saw the containers. They had planned this. And heaven was watching. When they reached the open field, they forced me onto my knees. The night was silent except for their ragged breathing and the distant chirping of insects. I prayed silently, not for deliverance, but for courage to face what was coming. The smell of gasoline grew stronger as they unscrewed their containers. Cold liquid splashed over my clothes, my head, my face. It seeped into my skin and stung my eyes. They argued briefly about who would light the match, each man wanting the honor. Eventually, one stepped forward, trembling not with fear, but with bloodlust. I lifted my eyes to the heavens one last time. "Jesus, into your hands, I commit my spirit." The match struck. That tiny sound, scratch, felt louder than thunder. The flame flickered for the briefest moment before the gasoline ignited with a violent whoosh. Instantly, I was engulfed. Fire is not like movies portray it. It is alive. A creature that wraps around you, claws into your skin, devours your flesh, and fills the air with the unbearable stench of burning human body. The pain was beyond comprehension. My scream tore from my throat, but the flames swallowed the sound. My hair vaporized. My skin began to bubble and peel as though melting from my bones. The world blurred. My body writhed uncontrollably, every nerve screaming. Flames consumed the oxygen around me, making breathing impossible. My lungs burned even without fire touching them. I felt my body failing. My vision dimmed. But somewhere deep inside the inferno, my spirit cried out, Jesus. My attackers stepped back in awe and confusion. They expected a quick death. Instead, I remained conscious, praying, even as my body was being destroyed. Neighbors began gathering at a distance, drawn by the glow and smell. Some screamed. Others wept. Everyone believed they were witnessing my execution. At exactly 9:47 p.m., according to later medical records, my heart stopped. Peace washed over me. The pain vanished. Silence surrounded me. I rose, not in my body, but above it, watching the flames consume what remained of me. I saw my attackers. I saw the horrified neighbors. I saw my own burning flesh. Death had no fear in it, only clarity. Then, through the fire, a figure appeared. Bright. Powerful. Untouched by the flames. Jesus. He walked toward me with steps that made the fire bow. His voice thundered and whispered simultaneously. Samuel, it is not your time. He reached out his pierced hand. And everything changed. When Jesus stretched out his hand, time itself seemed to halt. The flames froze, suspended like fiery waves awaiting the command of their true master. His presence radiated a purity that made the inferno feel like nothing more than candlelight. Samuel, he said, his eyes burning with love more powerful than the fire beneath us, your work is not finished. As his hand touched what remained of my soul, I felt a pull, gentle, yet filled with divine force. My spirit was drawn downward, back toward my charred and ruined body. I expected to re-enter a corpse, but something impossible was happening. The fire no longer consumed me, it obeyed him. The flames danced over my skin like servants fulfilling the will of their king. Instead of destruction, heat became healing. Instead of agony, warmth flowed like life itself. My flesh began regenerating. Where bone had been exposed, muscle formed. Where muscle had been destroyed, skin stretched anew. Hair sprouted across my scalp. My eyebrows returned. My lungs filled with fresh air, though my heart was still silent. Then came the rain. Without warning, the sky opened in a deluge of water. In March, deep in the dry season, rain poured down with supernatural intensity. Witnesses later testified that the sky had been perfectly clear moments before. As the water hit the fire, steam rose like incense. The flames died within seconds. Every drop that landed on me carried restoration, cooling, cleansing, renewing. Meanwhile, my attackers fell on their faces, terrified beyond words. Some screamed prayers. Others begged Allah for mercy. One shouted in Hausa, "This is the power of the Christians' God." At exactly 9:54 p.m., my heart began to beat again. Each heartbeat felt like a thunderclap echoing in my chest. My first breath came like that of a newborn, violent, desperate, full of life. My eyes opened, seeing the world not as a dying man, but as one resurrected by the living Christ. I stood. My burned clothes hung in tatters, but my body was whole, more whole than before I ever entered the flames. My skin was smooth, unscarred. My hands strong. My voice steady. My attackers trembled before me. They had tried to kill a man. But they had encountered God. The field was still steaming when I rose to my feet. My attackers lay sprawled in the mud, trembling violently as though struck by an unseen force. Some couldn't even lift their faces. The leader, Muhammad, crawled toward me on his knees, his body shaking uncontrollably. When he reached me, he grabbed my ankles and cried out, "Forgive me. Forgive me. I have seen the power of your God." Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the mud. His voice cracked as he confessed his hatred, his blindness, his ignorance. He said he had believed he was defending truth. But after witnessing the fire obey Jesus, he realized he had been fighting against the true God all along. 3 of the 8 attackers immediately surrendered their lives to Christ. Among them was Yusuf, the man who had lit the match. He wept uncontrollably, clutching his chest as though his heart were breaking open under conviction. "Jesus, forgive me," he repeated over and over. In that field, the fire that had been meant to end my life sparked the salvation of souls. The remaining 5 fled into the darkness, stumbling, screaming, unable to reconcile what they had seen. But even they could not outrun the testimony. News spread through the community within minutes. Neighbors who had witnessed the miracle approached cautiously, touching my arms, my face, my neck, searching for burns that were not there. A Muslim woman named Fatima cried, "This is the work of God, only God." Children who had been hiding behind their parents now rushed toward me, amazed to see that the man they had watched burning was fully restored. Someone had called for an ambulance. By the time paramedics arrived, they found me sitting calmly on a rock, surrounded by a crowd of witnesses all speaking at once. The medical team was skeptical, until they examined the charred remains of my clothing and listened to the consistent testimonies of over a dozen eyewitnesses. When they asked to take me to the hospital, I agreed, not for my sake, but to let the miracle be documented. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I felt no pain. Not a single ache. Not a single blister. Inside the speeding vehicle, a paramedic touched my forearm and whispered, "But, you should be dead." I smiled. I said softly. But Jesus said my time was not yet. At Kaduna General Hospital, the atmosphere was a mix of disbelief and nervous awe. Nurses whispered as I passed. Doctors exchanged confused looks. The smell of burnt fabric clung to me, yet my skin was smooth, unmarked. The physician assigned to my case was Dr. Ibrahim Yakubu, a highly respected Muslim doctor. He examined me with the seriousness of a man determined to prove the reports exaggerated. He first requested to see my clothing, shredded, burned, smelling unmistakably of human flesh and gasoline. Then he looked at the statements of witnesses, including the police officer who responded to the call. When the examination began, his confidence crumbled. He checked my skin inch by inch. No burns. No scars. Not even a scratch. He used a magnifying glass. He ordered X-rays. He ran blood tests. He checked for internal damage, respiratory burns, or cardiac trauma. Nothing. After 3 hours, he set his instruments down and stared at me with wide eyes. "This defies every medical principle I know," he admitted. "Based on eyewitness accounts, you should be dead. At the very least, you should be covered from head to toe with third-degree burns." "Pastor, this is impossible." I answered gently, "With God, nothing is impossible." He exhaled heavily and leaned back in his chair. "I have treated many fire victims," he said. "Men burned for less than 1 minute arrive screaming, their skin melting off. But you, burned for nearly 10 minutes, have no injuries. No scars. No evidence that fire touched you at all." He paused, then whispered, "I cannot explain this." He documented the miracle as unexplained complete recovery from total body burn exposure. There was no medical category for resurrection combined with supernatural healing. When the report was finished, he handed me the papers slowly, reverently, as though passing sacred documents. "Pastor Samuel," he said, his voice trembling, "I do not know what you saw in that fire. But I know you were not alone." I nodded. "Doctor, I know the one who stood with me." He lowered his eyes. "I believe you. Late that night, after the final tests were complete, I was discharged from the hospital. The nurses watched me leave with a mixture of shock and awe, whispering among themselves. One young nurse touched my arm as I walked past her and said quietly, "Sir, whatever God did for you, I want Him to do for me too." Her words pierced my heart. The miracle was no longer just my story. It was becoming a movement. When I walked through the door of our home that night, the house was dimly lit. Sarah was on her knees with the children, praying with a desperation I had never witnessed before. She had heard rumors of an attack but no details. She feared the worst. When she looked up and saw me, soaked, alive, whole, she froze. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened. Then she collapsed. I rushed to her side, calling her name, shaking her gently until she regained consciousness. When she opened her eyes, she touched my face with trembling hands. "You're alive," she whispered, more in disbelief than joy. "Yes," I answered softly, "Jesus kept me." She wept, loud, uncontrollable sobs that shook her body. She touched my arms, my chest, my face, as though confirming I wasn't a vision. The children clung to me, confused but relieved. "Daddy smells like smoke," they said repeatedly. "Why is everyone crying?" I held them close. "Because God performed a miracle," I told them. Within the hour, neighbors began arriving. Some had seen the fire. Others heard the shouts. Word spread faster than wildfire. Soon our small living room was overflowing, Christians, Muslims, skeptics, elders, youth, every eye fixed on the pastor who should have been dead. People touched my hands, my shoulders, my face. They gasped when they felt smooth skin where burns should have been. An elderly Muslim man approached, his voice trembling. "We saw you burning," he said. "But you are standing here. Pastor, this is God." I nodded gently. "Yes. Only God." We prayed together, Christians and Muslims, something unimaginable just hours earlier. By midnight, there were more people outside than inside. Some were singing worship songs. Others were crying. Many simply stood speechless. That night, our home became a sanctuary. Our family did not sleep. Neither did half the town. Sarah held my hand tightly, afraid that if she let go, I might disappear. She asked me to recount everything, every second, every detail. When I told her about Jesus in the fire, she broke down again. "My dreams," she whispered. "I saw flames, but I never saw you burned." God was warning us, but He was also preparing us. For the first time in my life, I felt the full weight of what it meant to be chosen, not for comfort, but for a testimony. A testimony that was only beginning. The Sunday after my resurrection was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Our church, which normally held 150 people, was overflowing with more than 800 attendees. People climbed windows, stood in doorways, gathered under trees, anything to catch a glimpse of the pastor who had walked out of fire. Some came out of curiosity. Others came out of fear. Many came because they had heard that God had stepped into a field in our small town. Muslims sat beside Christians. Skeptics stood shoulder to shoulder with believers. Even imams from neighboring communities came, not to accuse, but to observe. When I stepped onto the podium, the crowd fell silent. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. Some people gasped when they saw that my skin bore no scars. I took a long breath and said, "I stand before you today not because fire spared me, but because Jesus saved me." Tears filled the room. I shared my testimony from beginning to end, how fear tried to claim me, how fire consumed my body, how death pulled me away, and how Jesus pulled me back. As I spoke, you could feel the atmosphere shift. People wept. People worshipped. People fell to their knees spontaneously. More than 200 people gave their lives to Christ that day, many of them former Muslims who said, "We cannot deny what we have seen." In the weeks that followed, attendance grew so rapidly we had to add 2 more Sunday services. By the end of the month, we were running 3 full services each Sunday to accommodate the crowds. Testimonies poured in. A Muslim woman dreamt of Jesus inviting her into the light. A man with a crippled leg stood and walked during worship. A teenage girl delivered from demonic oppression testified that she saw a man, shining like fire, standing beside me as I preached. Within 6 months, we began construction on a larger building. Donations poured in from believers across Nigeria. Even some Muslims quietly gave toward the project, whispering that they wanted to support the God who saves from fire. My preaching changed too. It carried a weight and authority I had never known. When I spoke about persecution, people listened. When I spoke about miracles, they believed. When I spoke about Jesus, the atmosphere trembled. Our church became more than a congregation. It became a movement, a torch in a dark region. A fire no persecutor could extinguish. Surviving persecution changed everything. It changed how I preached. It changed how I lived. It changed what I feared, and more importantly, what I no longer feared. Before the attack, I often worried about threats, glances, warnings. But after facing death and being pulled back by Jesus himself, fear lost its voice. Once you have seen the boundary between life and eternity, earthly intimidation becomes weak and hollow. Requests poured in from across Africa. I shared my testimony in Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, Egypt, South Africa, and beyond. Everywhere I went, people flocked to hear how God still intervenes in supernatural ways. I watched hardened skeptics crumble under conviction. I saw Muslims openly ask for Bibles. I saw atheists kneel in surrender. Not because my words were eloquent, but because my story shattered their arguments. Resurrection speaks a universal language. In 2020, we launched Fire Survivors Ministry, a mission dedicated to supporting Christians facing persecution across Africa. We trained pastors on how to endure trials with courage. We provided resources to believers in high-risk areas. We traveled to remote villages where churches met in fear, reminding them that Jesus still walks into the fire with his people. Whenever I stood before persecuted believers, I told them, God does not always prevent the fire. Sometimes he joins us in it. That truth gave them strength. It gave them identity. It reminded them they were not alone. As the ministry expanded, so did my understanding of purpose. I realized that God allowed me to walk through fire not just for my sake, but for the sake of thousands who needed proof that he still reigns above persecution. My wife Sarah became stronger too. Though she had feared losing me, she now traveled with me, speaking to women about faith, courage, and spiritual resilience. And our children grew up knowing that their father was not just a pastor but a living testimony of God's power. Some nights, when I reflect on everything, I remember the voices of those men around me in the field. I remember the flames. The pain. The silence after death. But more than all that, I remember the footsteps of Jesus walking toward me, unburned, unstoppable, radiant with glory. And whenever fear tries to whisper, I silence it with one truth. I have already died once. What more can man do to me? As the years passed, people often asked me, Pastor, why did God save you that night? It is a question I still ponder. I know many faithful believers who suffered persecution and did not survive. I know pastors who died. Evangelists who disappeared. Families who lost loved ones because of the gospel. Why did God intervene in my case? I do not claim to know every reason. But I know this: miracles are never about the person, they are about God's purpose. Jesus didn't save me to elevate my name. He saved me to elevate his. My resurrection became a message louder than any sermon I could preach. It became a rebuke to darkness, a warning to persecutors, and an invitation to the lost. Everywhere I went, people asked, does God still perform miracles today? Yes, my life is proof. Can Jesus still heal the broken? Yes, he heals flesh and soul alike. Can God protect believers in dangerous places? Yes, but his protection sometimes comes through the fire, not before it. When people facing impossible situations heard my story, hope returned. When pastors in Muslim-dominated regions felt overwhelmed, they found courage again. When young believers questioned the power of God, they found certainty. And each time I recounted what happened in the field, I felt the presence of Jesus all over again. His voice echoes in my spirit, "It is not your time." Sometimes God delivers us from the furnace. Sometimes God joins us inside it. Either way, his presence is the miracle. For Christians living in comfort, I carry a different message. Many believers in safe countries do not share their faith boldly. They fear rejection, embarrassment, discomfort. But I want them to know. If Jesus can save a man from literal fire, what excuse remains for silence? If the God of Scripture still raises the dead, why live as though his power is limited to ancient history? Jesus is alive. His power is real. His miracles never ended. And if we truly believe that, we must live like ambassadors of the supernatural. The gospel is not a quiet story, it is a burning one. A message so powerful that hell trembles when it is preached. So I ask every believer. Are you willing to stand for Jesus? Are you willing to endure discomfort? Opposition? Persecution? Would you follow him even if the road leads to fire? Because Jesus is still asking his followers today the same question he asked me through flames. Do you trust me, even here? 6 years have passed since that night in the field, yet the memory remains as vivid as if it happened yesterday. The smell of gasoline. The roar of flames. The moment my heart stopped. The instant Jesus stepped into the fire. But what stays with me most is not the pain. It is the presence. When I close my eyes, I can still see his silhouette walking toward me, glowing brighter than the flames. I still hear his voice cutting through death, "Samuel, it is not your time." Those words rebirth me daily. Today, I preach with a boldness that is not my own. When I speak of God's power, I speak as one who has tasted it. When I speak of his faithfulness, I speak as one who has witnessed it firsthand. When I speak of miracles, I speak as one who lived one. But this testimony is not just for pastors. Not just for missionaries. Not just for persecuted believers. It is for you. We all face fires. Maybe yours is not a physical flame. Maybe it is the death of hope, the collapse of a marriage, the loss of purpose, the burial of a dream. Maybe your spirit feels burned, your future scorched, your faith weakened by heat you cannot escape. But hear this. The same God who pulled me from literal fire can pull you from emotional fire, spiritual fire, financial fire, relational fire. What seems dead, God can resurrect. What seems destroyed, he can restore. What seems impossible, he can overturn with one word. Not yet. Your enemies may strike the match. But Jesus controls the flame. Your attackers may surround you. But Jesus surrounds them. Your situation may look hopeless. But heaven is never helpless. I stand today as living proof of Isaiah's promise. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. The fire meant to kill me became the stage for God's power. The men who sought to silence me became witnesses of his glory. The night of my death became the beginning of my calling. And now I pass the question on to you. Will you trust Jesus in your fire? Will you let him turn your ashes into testimony? Will you take his hand when life burns around you? Because he is still walking into flames. Still saving. Still healing. Still resurrecting. And his hand is reaching for you.